Hey everybody, Mike Pfeiffer with Pfeiffer Hobby Supply. Today I'm going to show you how I poured my lake on the ACT, and you can apply this to possibly your layout. So this is a how-to on how to pour a lake. I took this video over a matter of about a week or a week and a half. It's a slow process. It's the way I do it, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, as you guys have seen, I have some still pictures of what I was doing here, and now you see the dam. You see that I've put plaster cloth over this, and you also see that I put plaster, liquidy, if that's a word, plaster in the bottom of the lake to create the bottom. I think the next step tomorrow would be to put some ground plaster around the edges. I don't know as I necessarily need to do the whole thing. I may try and do the whole thing. And then after that comes painting the bottom and then painting up the side some so that I can get the water poured. And once the water's poured, then we'll see about doing more scenery work on the whole module itself. I guess I would call it a module since it just sets in and pulls out. But you get the idea of the dam being here. There's a little natural dirt spillway that goes around the dam, and then it goes downhill, and this will go into the river, of course. But anyway, this is the first piece of video that I've taken of it since I've started doing the plastering, and I'll keep you guys updated as I go along. Okay, everybody, last night I came out and put the texture plaster on around the edges and down the canyon here. Today I'm going to put some color in the bottom, put some acrylic in the bottom of the lake, and maybe a little bit up the sides so that I can pour water. If you notice here, I globbed on some large globs of plaster, and I've got cracks and stuff there, but I don't really care. I'll cover that all up with foliage. Not a big deal. So you can kind of see how this thing is taking shape. I'm going to work on some paint, and I'll take another video after. Okay, at this point you can see that I've dumped some really thinned out black into the lake, and it gives you a chance to see how your liquid water is going to settle. And it looks like I'm going to have a little problem with this end being low. So when I pour this, I'm going to have to lift this end up just slightly, ever so slightly, to get it to go down towards the dam. We're going to let this black paint and water dry in here. It accomplishes another thing also. It allows you to see whether you're leaking anything out. And if I walk all the way around this thing, we can see that even though it's two pieces put together, I'm not leaking out any along the seam here. The only place I have a little bit of coming over is right over here in the crotch, which is from that end being a little bit low. I'm going to put a piece of paper under it and tip it up a little bit, and let's take a look at it. Okay, at this point I have put a piece of folded newspaper under it, and you can see that the water has receded from where the inlet area is, and some of it is collecting down here by the dam. There's still a little high spot down here by the dam, but we can take care of that with paint when we pour the water. And I have a good, half inch, quarter of an inch of thickness that I can pour the water. But this gives you a good idea of how much material you're going to need. I used the equivalent of about a full container of this oatmeal container here of liquid and black paint, black acrylic. But I'm going to let this in here dry while I go in the train room and do some other things. And once that's dry, I'll come back and do some more painting, and at some point I'll be ready to put in some liquid. Okay, gang, here is just kind of a base coat on the textured plaster, and you can see that I have the bottom of the lake basically painted in. I have one coat of gray on the dam, which it needs another coat, but I'm getting there and getting ready to the point where I can pour the lake. This is the progress so far. All I did to do this was I had a bigger brush than this one. I had one about 3 times this big. Dipped it in the water, dipped it in the color over here. I used quite a bit of color, just kind of stippled it on, got a little bit of the red, stippled it in, as you can see here. And then foliage will go on top of this. This will be wetted down, and foliage will be sprinkled on, and then glue. And I'm not sure, these slopes are throwing me off a little bit. I think when I do the lake will be poured obviously with a 2-part epoxy resin, and when I glue the scenery on there, of course that glue is going to run down onto the lake. I'll have a wet paper towel handy to kind of keep that off the surface of the lake, I hope. At least that's the game plan. You can't see it from this side, maybe you can see it close up. I put some hot glue along here to keep my resin from running out the end. And I don't know, maybe I'll get around tomorrow to pouring the resin. I'm not sure yet. I've got to, like I say, I've got to get another coat of gray on there, and we'll go from there. But that's it so far. Okay, as in the previous portion of the video, I now have 2 coats of paint on the dam. Everything in the lake bottom has dried, so we're ready to pour water. Let me show you what we're going to do. Okay, this is magic water. We ran across this gentleman at a convention, and I'm sure it's just a repackaged product of some kind, but it doesn't matter. The key thing is that it seems to work very well. It's a 2-part epoxy resin, and there's a 2-part resin material. It is not water soluble. It's a lot like Envirotex, if any of you have used Envirotex, like they use on tabletops in restaurants and so forth. But what we're going to do is we're going to mix some up here, and I'm going to show you what I do with it and how I do it, and we'll see if it turns out. Okay, here's the instructions that come with the magic water. This is Dave Williams, the gentleman who owns the company. It goes on to tell you about mixing. He also has a lot of information on how to create a pond or make a pond out of plaster and a mold, and more and more stuff that you can do with it. How to get rid of bubbles using on foam, directly on foam. We're not doing that. Leaks and viscosity, table edge sealing. I mean, there's just all kinds of information here. How to make swamps, cleaning up your mess. Just about everything that you could want to know about magic water is in here. I have used products similar to this over a period of time. So we're just going to mix this up, and I'll show you how I do it, and we're going to pour our lake. My lake is only going to be probably 1/4 inch thick, if even that. So I'm going to mix the entire contents of both of these bottles and throw out what I don't use, because I think it's going to take all of that. If I look volumetrically here at the area and how thick, and then kind of just in my head equate that to what's in the bottles here, I'm pretty sure that it's going to take the entire amount. Besides that, I'm going to color it. So I don't want to have to try and match the color shade again. So I'm going to mix the whole batch. I know it's kind of a waste if I don't use it all, but that's just the way it's going to have to go. So let's get on with this. Okay, I decided to get just a little bit bigger container because I didn't think it was enough. I'm going to pour the contents of this bottle and the contents of that bottle into here, and I am going to mix in some acrylic. This is the acrylic navy blue that I had used, true navy, that I had used for some of the bottom, and I'm just going to lightly put it in there. We don't want it totally really dark. We want it kind of transparent, so I'm not going to put much of this in there, just enough to tint the color. So let me put the product in here, and I'll put the tinting in when I get that far, and I'll show you. Okay, I have the two parts poured into here. I haven't mixed anything yet. I forgot to tell you to have some popsicle sticks handy or something to stir it with. And I'm just going to put a few drops. There's about 6 drops of this navy blue acrylic in there. And as you can see, the acrylic doesn't run a mix with the resin product very well, but if the more you stir it, the more color you get out of it. We're going to make sure we stir it real good. We're going to sweep the sides. If any of you have mixed resin or anything before, you've got to sweep the sides of your container, the bottom. You got to make sure it thoroughly mixes. And you can see, I think you can see that we have kind of a light blue color right now, and that's what I want. I want a color in the resin, but I want it to be relatively transparent so that we can see the painting on the bottom, or the painting on the bottom shows through the resin when we pour the resin on. And you can see that once you start mixing this, it's very liquid, okay? And the color, the acrylic color, mixes pretty well in there. And I'm just going to keep stirring this for a little while, probably for a couple of minutes, and then I'll come back as we start to pour this. Okay, I have all my resin mixed. I may have too much here, but we're going to start pouring. One thing that I don't know if I mentioned yet or not is be sure that you have this whole bottom sealed and you have edges sealed if you're doing it on the edge of the layout. And if you're not sure, go back and make double sure. What you might do in a case of the edge right over here, I put hot glue on there. It should be sufficient because it's going to be at the top of the pour. But if you had a layout edge there, you might even consider putting some silicone on there and squishing it around a little bit, and then put a piece of tape over the outside. You just need to make absolutely sure, because you can see how liquid this stuff is. When you pour it in there, if there's a hole, it's running out. And once it starts to run out, getting control of it is nearly impossible. So I'm pretty confident. I poured. You saw me pour the wet acrylic paint in here last night or the other day, and it stayed in there. So we're pretty confident that we can hold liquid. So I'm going to start pouring. And another tip is pour from pretty high up, because that tends to get bubbles out of it. But I'm going to show you another way when we get through here. The higher you start pouring from, and the smaller the stream is that you're pouring, the less bubbles you will have. And I'm just going to work my way around, and I know my arm is in the way, but I don't have a choice. But I'm just going to work my way around the lake, and I'm going to see where the product goes, because it's going to follow its own path. I neglected to mention too that as I've pointed out in the previous videos, I've kind of tested level here with the water that I poured in, so I know how much I need to tilt up one end. But if I get pouring this and I get enough in there to cover the whole bottom, and it looks like it's all going down to one end, we'll put some shims under this to shim it up and get the stuff to flow where we want it to flow. Now you can see that even though I put a bluish color in there, we're still obtaining, or still have the color that I painted the bottom. We want to, in this case, we want to see that. If we were doing a swamp or something where you didn't want to see the bottom, then you might want to consider making your tint darker. So I'm just putting the product in, and you can see that it follows its own course. And it looks like it's pretty level. And there goes the last bit of what I mixed. It appears that this is, what I've poured in there is flowing backwards that way. And you can see that my area up against the dam is a little on the sparse side. So I believe I'm going to take some newspaper, which I have handy here, and I'm going to shim up what you're seeing as the right hand side and try and get that stuff to run down towards the dam. When we put it on the layout, it'll still look level. It takes it a little while to flow, but it will follow or find its own natural course. In fact, I could tilt it up here and help that along a little bit, see what the consistency is. See if it recedes back. And I can see some particles in here that are flowing back that way. So I believe I'm going to fold my newspaper one more time and stick it back under to double the thickness. And now I can see the particles appear to be standing relatively still in the pour. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of bubbles in there. If we did have an over amount of bubbles in there, and actually that took the whole contents of the magic water. However, it is about 1/4 of an inch thick, maybe not quite 1/4 of an inch thick. And we'll worry about detailing the top of the water later on. But you can see that it's filled nicely where I want it to be. So let me get something real fast and I'll show you, if you wind up with a bunch of bubbles, how to get rid of them. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our handy dandy Burnsmatic torch. And all we're going to do is we're going to light the torch and we're going to turn it way, way down. And the idea is just to go over the top of the water, high off the top of the water, and the carbon dioxide coming out of the end of this will suck the bubbles to the top. If it's real bubbly, you would see a drastic difference in bubbles coming to the top. I doubt that you'll see it here because from pouring high up, we don't have a lot of bubbles in this. And we're going to add texture to the top of this later anyway. But let me demonstrate to you how this is done, okay? I'm going to just barely turn the gas on. And I think you're able to see the flame there still. We're turning it way down to almost nothing. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go over the top. You turn it up just a little bit. And I know you probably can't see it on camera, but I can see some bubbles that have come up. And it just immediately pops those bubbles, takes them right out of the surface. You don't want to overdo this. You don't want to overheat the resin. And this stuff is pretty pretty safe breathing wise. You can do it in a confined space because this particular product doesn't have a lot of fumes like Envirotex. And really, I've done enough of this trying to get the bubbles out. There weren't very many in there, like I said. So we're going to call that good, and we're going to let this dry. And okay, here's our pour, and I'm looking at the instructions here, and the instructions are saying this. Magic water will set in approximately 24 hours at 70 degrees. It will take longer at lower temperatures. The lower the temperature, the longer it will take. You may hasten the curing with a hair dryer, but you risk the chance of blowing debris onto the surface. So let's see, just be sure you mix well and let it set on its own. Magic water will set hard. Hard rubber state won't crack and can be carved or drilled. In any case, the temperature has no adverse effect on the product either before or after it is set. It will withstand natural cold and heat and last for years even after it's been opened. It has unlimited shelf life. So there you have it. We poured it. It's about, I don't know what it is. It's about, let's see what it is. It's about 10:30. So about 10:30 tomorrow morning, that stuff should be hard as a rock. I'm hoping it gets hard enough that I can move it from this location, but by about 3 o'clock or so this afternoon, but we'll see. If not, I'll be very careful in moving it. It does tend to get stiffer and stiffer as time goes on, but it doesn't reach full hardness for 24 hours. So now I'm going to zoom in on this and let you take a real close look at it from another angle where you can see the gloss of the top of the surface. Okay, in this shot from a different angle you can see the front side of the dam, and you can see how smooth and level the lake surface is. And we'll zoom in a little bit all the way back there. You can also see in this that there's that this product, other than me moving this, you can see that it doesn't creep. Let me back this up a little bit. Other than me re-leveling this, there's hardly any creep up the sides. I created creep over here because I re-leveled it and the fluid went that way. But if you look at this edge, and let me pan in there, you can see that it just does not creep up the edge like a lot of materials. So anyways, I like the product. We're going to let it dry. I am going to zoom back out here. Got a beautiful view or reflection of my fly swatter handle. But there's how she looks from the other side. So we'll let it dry and we'll continue on. I would also like to mention at this point also that at this point in time would be the time to submerge logs or rocks or whatever other things you may want to put in the water in a standing lake or something. You may want to put something in there. Fish, I don't know, whatever you feel like putting in there. But this would be the time to do it. I won't bother right now, but when we get to doing the river portion of this, I will show you how to add rapids and use cotton to make foam and all kinds of other things. But we'll save that for another video. But this would be the point at which you would want to put rocks and debris into the water if you choose to do so. Possibly even setting boats and things in there at this point might be a good idea. However, that can be done later by cutting the bottom of the boat off and sitting it on top. And then working around that. But we'll get to that later. Okay, everybody. The water is cured. And it's been like 48 hours or more. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some ripples to the top of the water, and I'm going to use the Woodland Scenic CW4515. It's water ripples. I have not used this product before. The last time I did one of these and I did something on the surface, I used Mod Podge, and it worked equally well. But we're going to see how this stuff goes. You're supposed to let this stuff cure for 24 hours. So I'm going to put it on here, and we're not going to see the results of this dried and dry brushed and stuff until later on, because I think I'm going to finish this video up on making this lake today. So anyway, we're just going to apply this and see how it goes. Okay, this stuff is perfectly clear. It says to apply it with a stiff brush. I have a stiff brush here. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of thick. But anyway, I'm going to start applying it, and I'm going to work kind of around an angle as though the wind is blowing across the lake like this. Okay? So I'm going to start at this end here, and we'll just put on some ripples. And it's really just a matter of dabbing it on. My idea here is to kind of work around in like a semicircle area. As though the wind is kind of blowing around in a at least kind of a round fashion as it goes across the surface of the lake. It's obviously not a hard product to apply. I'm gonna go ahead and, instead of making you boring you with doing this, I'm gonna stop and I'll show you what it looks like when I get done. Okay, down at this angle you can see how the rippling looks going across the lake, and a little more of it right down in here where the water's entering the lake. And like I say, it says it takes 24 hours to dry. I'm going to put a pipe coming out down here that's going to be feeding the river, and I'm going to paint over this spillway, this little auxiliary spillway. But when I get ready to do the river, we'll go on down this way. But as far as the lake itself, I think it's ready to go. I will probably pull it out again to do scenery work on it. But anyway, that is the lake. Okay, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that video on how to make a lake. And as usual, thanks for watching.